My name is Amina Okafor, and I almost did not go to that dinner. My friend Grace had begged me for weeks to meet a man she called important, someone connected to powerful people in Seoul. I run a small charity that helps abandoned children and refugees, and I do not have time for blind dates. But Grace said this favor meant everything to her, so I agreed, just this once. The restaurant was the kind of place I never visit, all glass and gold and quiet music. I smoothed my dress and walked in with my head high, even though my stomach was tight with nerves. The host led me past tables filled with people who looked like they belonged in magazines, and I felt every eye follow me across the room. A tall Korean man sat at the best table, dressed sharp, his face cold like stone. This was Kang Min-jae. I had heard whispers about him before, quiet warnings passed between friends that he was not just a businessman, but something far more dangerous, a man whose name alone could empty a room. Before I could even say hello, before I could pull out my chair, he looked at me the way you look at something you want removed from a room. "I don't date black women," he said, loud enough for every table to hear. The restaurant went silent. Someone's fork hit a plate. I saw phones lifting, screens glowing, people recording my humiliation like it was entertainment. My face burned, but I refused to let him see me cry. "Then I apologize for wasting your time," I said quietly, and I walked out with as much dignity as I could hold on to. But as I reached the door, I felt his eyes still on me, and for reasons I could not explain, that frightened me more than his words had. By morning, the video was everywhere. My phone would not stop buzzing. Friends, strangers, even reporters wanted to know how I felt about being humiliated by one of Korea's most feared men. Millions of people online were furious at Min-jae, calling him cruel, calling him a coward hiding behind money and threats. I did not want any of it. I turned off my phone and went to the charity center because the children there did not care about viral videos. They needed breakfast, homework help, and someone to listen to them. That was my life, and I intended to keep living it quietly, no matter what strangers online were shouting about me. But reporters found the center anyway. They discovered I had spent years helping orphaned and refugee children without ever asking for praise or cameras. Suddenly, I was not just the woman he rejected. I was someone people respected, and that made Min-jae's cruelty look even worse in the public eye. Meanwhile, I later learned his own enemies inside the criminal world were watching closely. A man's reputation is a weapon in that world, and mine had accidentally become a blade pointed straight at his throat. His empire was not shaking from bullets or betrayal this time. It was shaking from one sentence he said without thinking. Then, strange and unexpected, an anonymous message reached him. "The woman you rejected is the only person who can save your family." I knew nothing of this warning. I only knew that my quiet life had been dragged into the light, and I had no idea how much closer my path was about to come to his. I first heard about the missing girl on the evening news, like everyone else in Seoul. A child had vanished after school, and the reporters said she was connected to a powerful, dangerous family. I did not know yet that the family was Min-jae's, or that the missing girl was his young niece. Something about the story would not leave my mind. I looked closely at a photograph the news kept showing, a picture taken near the school gates. In the corner of that photo was an old drainage tunnel, half hidden by bushes. I had seen frightened children hide in places exactly like that before, dark, forgotten corners where nobody thinks to look twice. I could not stay silent. I called a contact I trusted at the child welfare office and told them what I suspected. They were skeptical, but desperate enough to check. Hours later, the news confirmed it. The little girl had been found safe, exactly where I said she would be, cold and terrified but alive. I did not learn until later that Min-jae himself had been the one pacing his office, refusing to sleep, refusing food, blaming himself for every second his niece was missing. His men had searched every alley, every rooftop, every abandoned building they could think of, and still found nothing. When one of his security officers finally told him a stranger's tip had led them straight to the girl, and that the stranger was me, the same woman he had humiliated days earlier, he went completely silent, unable to make sense of it. Days after, a car arrived outside my center. His assistant offered me an envelope thick with money, a reward, a thank you. I refused it. I did not save that child for payment. I closed the door gently and returned to my work, but I could still feel his confusion following me. Even from a distance, I could not explain. Min-jae could not understand me, and this bothered him more than he wanted to admit. A woman he had humiliated in front of strangers had quietly saved someone he loved, then walked away asking for nothing. He began digging into my life, searching for some hidden motive, some trick. He found none, only years of quiet sacrifice. While he searched for answers about me, an old friend finally told him the truth about himself. Long ago, Min-jae's father had trusted an international crime syndicate, and that partnership had destroyed him. One member of that group happened to be a black woman, and somehow, in his grieving young mind, Min-jae had let that single detail grow into hatred for an entire race. He had carried that wound since childhood, never once questioning if it was fair or true. Hearing this out loud, spoken plainly by someone he trusted, shook him deeply. He realized he had built years of coldness on top of a boy's broken heart and a story he never fully understood. It did not excuse what he said to me, but it explained where the poison had first taken root. Before he could process any of this, more trouble arrived. My charity center was attacked in the night, windows shattered, walls sprayed with paint, files scattered across the floor. The children were terrified. I stood in the wreckage the next morning shaking, wondering who could hate a children's center enough to destroy it, and why this was happening to me now, of all times. I refused police protection after the attack. I was afraid that officers standing outside would only draw more attention, more danger, toward the very children I was trying to keep safe. I told myself I could handle this alone, the way I had handled everything else in my life. What I did not know was that Min-jae had quietly ordered his own security team to watch over the center from a distance without ever telling me. He said nothing, expected no thanks, just stationed careful eyes around a building full of children he had never even visited. That decision mattered more than he realized. Days later, armed men returned in the darkness, intending to finish what they had started. This time, Min-jae's guards were ready. They stopped the attackers before real harm was done, though one intruder escaped into the shadows before he could be questioned. I woke up the next morning to find broken glass swept away and the gate quietly repaired, with no explanation and no name attached. I assumed a kind neighbor had helped, never imagining the truth. But the guards had captured something important on their hidden cameras, a single whispered sentence from one of the fleeing attackers, a name that belonged deep inside Min-jae's own criminal organization. Someone close to him, someone he trusted, was funding the attacks against me. The danger was not coming from strangers or rivals outside his world. It was coming from within his own circle, and neither of us yet understood how far that betrayal would reach. Min-jae confronted the footage with disbelief at first, then cold fury. The whispered name belonged to Choi, one of his most trusted lieutenants, a man who had served his family for over a decade. Choi had secretly partnered with a rival gang, hoping to use the public scandal from our humiliating dinner as the perfect cover to weaken Min-jae and eventually take his place. They had targeted me on purpose, not because of who I was, but because they knew the public already blamed Min-jae for my humiliation. If something happened to me, the world would assume he was responsible, and his empire would crumble under the weight of public outrage. I had become a pawn in a war I never asked to join. When Min-jae realized how much danger his silence had placed me in, something inside him shifted. He arrived at my center himself this time. No assistance, no reward envelopes, just him standing quietly at my door, insisting he needed to keep me safe personally until the threat was contained. I did not want his help. I told him plainly that I still wanted nothing from him, not his money, not his guilt, not his protection. He stood there patiently while I said it, not arguing, not defending himself, just listening in a way that surprised me. But the attacks were real, the danger was real, and eventually, for the safety of the children who depended on me, I agreed to temporary protection. I made sure he understood one thing clearly, my voice steady so there would be no confusion. This did not erase what he said to me that night at the restaurant. It only meant I was choosing survival over pride, nothing more, and nothing had been forgiven yet. Being forced into his presence meant Min Jae started noticing things he never expected. He watched me hand out food to homeless families with my own money. He watched me sit beside a grieving mother for hours, saying almost nothing, just staying present so she would not be alone. He watched me treat his own guards with the same warmth I gave to strangers on the street. Nobody in his world spoke to him without fear or hidden motives. Every smile he received usually came with a request attached. My kindness confused him because it asked for nothing in return. Slowly, I noticed the coldness in his eyes softening, just slightly, whenever he thought I was not paying attention. During one quiet evening, while reviewing old paperwork connected to my charity's finances, I stumbled across something strange. A set of financial records mentioning his late father's business dealings. Curious, I mentioned it to Min Jae, not realizing how important that discovery would become. He studied the documents for hours that night, his expression growing darker with every page. Something about the numbers did not match the story he had believed his entire life, the story that had shaped his hatred, his coldness, and the terrible words he had spoken to me at that first dinner. Neither of us understood yet how deeply that discovery would change everything. I only saw a man who suddenly looked lost, staring at old paper, as if it held the answer to a question that had haunted him since childhood. The full truth came out slowly, piece by piece. Those old financial records proved that Min Jae's father had not been betrayed by a random international crime syndicate at all. He had been deliberately framed by his own trusted Korean business partners, men who wanted his territory and his fortune for themselves. The black woman Min Jae had blamed for decades, the one who shaped his entire hatred toward women who looked like me, had actually tried to warn his father before everything collapsed. She had risked her own safety trying to save him, and no one had ever told Min Jae the truth. When he finally understood this, the guilt hit him like a physical blow. His entire worldview, built brick by brick since childhood, crumbled in an instant. He had insulted me, humiliated me publicly, carried hatred toward an entire group of people, all because of a lie manufactured by men greedy for power. He wanted to find me immediately, to apologize, to explain everything he had just learned. But before he could reach me, disaster struck first. I never made it to our next meeting. Instead, I was taken from outside my own charity center, dragged into a car by men I did not recognize, my phone left shattered on the pavement. Min Jae arrived only minutes later to find the street empty, my scarf lying torn on the ground. The woman who had saved his niece, exposed his father's true story, and quietly changed his understanding of the world was now gone, and he had no idea if he would ever see me again. I woke up in a cold, unfamiliar room with my hands tied and my heart pounding. The men who took me worked for a rival organization, and they made their demands clear almost immediately. They wanted Min Jae to surrender his territory, his power, everything he had built, in exchange for my life. His advisors argued furiously against giving in. No mafia boss sacrifices his empire for one woman, they told him, insisting it was weakness, insisting it would destroy everything his family had built for generations. Min Jae ignored every single one of them. For the first time in his life, he chose a person over his own reputation. He began preparing to trade away power, territory, and influence, all to save someone he had once publicly rejected, without a second thought. His men could not understand this transformation, but he no longer cared what they thought. I did not know any of this while sitting in that cold room, listening to footsteps pass outside the door, counting the hours by the light shifting under the crack beneath it. I only knew that waiting quietly for rescue had never been who I was, not once in my entire life. I studied my captors carefully, noticing small details, how they argued among themselves over cigarettes, how two of them clearly distrusted each other over money they had been promised for this job. I began speaking calmly, quietly planting doubt between them, reminding one man that the other had been promised a larger share of the payment. Small sparks of suspicion began to grow. While Min Jae prepared to give away his empire for my freedom, I was already working on freeing myself, refusing to simply become someone waiting silently to be saved. The doubt I planted grew faster than I expected. My captors began arguing loudly, accusing each other of planning betrayal, until the tension exploded into a real fight between them. In the chaos, I managed to loosen the ropes around my wrists and slip toward a side door I had noticed earlier, half hidden behind stacked crates. I found several other hostages locked in a nearby room, frightened people taken for ransom or leverage, just like me. I freed them quietly, and together we created enough noise and confusion to distract the remaining guards long enough for Min-jae's rescue team to break through the front entrance. When Min-jae finally reached the building, prepared to trade away his entire empire for my life, he found chaos, freed hostages, and me standing calmly in the middle of it all, already safe. I had not needed rescuing, not the way everyone assumed I would. He stared at me like he was seeing me clearly for the very first time. I was not the fragile victim his enemies had used as a weapon against him. I was someone capable of saving myself and others, someone whose strength had nothing to do with fear. Relief and something deeper passed across his face as he stepped closer, checking that I was truly unharmed. I did not fall into his arms, and I did not pretend the danger had erased his earlier cruelty. But standing there among the people I had just helped free, I finally allowed myself to feel a small, cautious relief that he had come at all. News cameras gathered outside Min-jae's headquarters days later, expecting another scandal, another headline about violence or corruption. Instead, they witnessed something none of them predicted. Min-jae stood before the cameras and publicly admitted what he had done, apologizing directly to me for the cruel words he spoke that first night. His enemies expected this confession to destroy him completely, to prove once and for all that he was weak and unfit to lead. Instead, something unexpected happened. Millions of people who had once condemned him began praising his willingness to admit fault publicly, something powerful men rarely do. I stood beside him during that broadcast, not because I had fully forgiven him, but because I believed people deserved to hear the truth, including the truth about his father and the woman wrongly blamed for his family's downfall. When reporters turned to me asking if I accepted his apology, I answered honestly. I told them that his words meant something, but forgiveness does not automatically rebuild trust. Trust has to be earned slowly, through actions repeated over time, not through one emotional speech in front of cameras. Min-jae nodded, understanding exactly what I meant. That evening, he told me quietly that he finally understood what he needed to do next. Apologizing was only the beginning. He needed to prove, through real choices, that the man who once humiliated me had truly become someone different. Neither of us knew yet how quickly that promise would be tested. The betrayal came faster than either of us expected. While the world focused on Min-jae's public apology, Choi launched his coup, striking at the heart of the organization with brutal precision. Gunfire erupted through the compound. Several loyal members were killed defending their leader, and Min-jae himself was badly wounded while shielding innocent civilians from the chaos, instead of fighting for control of his own empire. I received the emergency call in the middle of the night and rushed to find him bleeding, refusing medical attention that might expose his location to enemies still hunting him. Against every warning from his remaining guards, I made the decision to hide him myself, using contacts from my charity work to find a safe place far from prying eyes. For days, I cared for his wounds in near silence, changing bandages, watching him drift in and out of pain. During those quiet, frightening hours, something between us finally shifted into honesty. He spoke about his fear of becoming his father, about the loneliness of power, about how deeply my kindness had confused and humbled him. I spoke, too, about the exhaustion of constantly proving my worth in a world quick to judge me, about carrying strength even when I felt like breaking. We were no longer the Mafia boss and the woman he insulted. We were simply two people, wounded in different ways, learning to trust each other in the dark. Recovery came slowly, but so did something else I had not expected to feel. Once Min-jae recovered enough to stand, he did not return to violence, even though many expected him to hunt down every traitor with brutal revenge. Instead, we worked together, gathering evidence against the corrupt officials who had been secretly protecting criminal networks for years, including the men responsible for framing his father decades earlier. Rather than eliminating his enemies through fear, Min Jae handed prosecutors detailed evidence that dismantled multiple criminal operations from the inside. His own followers questioned this choice fiercely, some accusing him of weakness, others abandoning him entirely. Convinced their boss had lost his edge, Min Jae addressed them calmly, telling them true strength was measured by the people you protect, not the people you control through fear. His words did not convince everyone, but many loyal members chose to leave criminal life completely, inspired by watching their leader choose a harder, more honest path. I watched him transform in ways I never imagined possible when he first spoke those cruel words to me. He began redirecting his family's wealth toward community projects, funding schools, medical clinics, and shelters instead of expanding criminal territory. The man built on inherited hatred was slowly rebuilding himself into someone unrecognizable from that night at the restaurant. I still guarded my heart carefully, unwilling to forget how deeply his words had once hurt me. But watching him choose difficult, honorable actions again and again, without cameras, without applause, made it harder to ignore the possibility that real change was actually happening in front of me. Months passed before the restaurant owner reached out, inviting us both back to the exact table where everything had started. I almost refused. Returning to that place meant reliving the humiliation, the recorded video, the silence that followed his cruel words. But curiosity and something softer I could not name convinced me to go. The same staff who had witnessed my humiliation stood quietly nearby, watching as Min Jae pulled out my chair himself this time. No assistants, no cameras, no crowd. He looked nothing like the cold, arrogant man from that first night. His voice was steady but humble when he finally spoke. He asked if I would consider giving him a real chance, an actual first date, free from prejudice, free from pride, free from the assumptions that once poisoned his heart. He did not offer money or gifts this time. He offered honesty, patience, and proof of everything he had worked to become since that terrible evening. I did not answer immediately. Instead, I studied his face carefully, searching for any trace of the man who once looked at me like I did not deserve basic respect. I found someone different, someone shaped by loss, truth, danger, and slow, deliberate change. Finally, I asked him one simple question, the only question that truly mattered to me anymore. Who are you now? His answer would decide everything, not just for this dinner, but for whatever future might still be possible between two people who began as strangers divided by hatred. Min Jae did not answer with pretty words. Instead, he showed me everything he had built since that painful night. Illegal operations closed permanently, community centers funded quietly without publicity, corrupt officials exposed and removed from power. My own charity received new resources, allowing us to help more children than I ever imagined possible. Watching him choose consistent action over empty promises finally convinced me that his transformation was real, not performance, not guilt, but genuine change earned through difficult choices repeated over time. I agreed to build a future with him, not because he was powerful or wealthy, but because he had become a better man through honest effort. Our wedding was small, filled with people from both our very different worlds. Former guards standing beside children from my charity, his mother embracing me with tears she never expected to cry. The scandal that once defined us both eventually became something else entirely. A story people remembered not for the cruelty at the beginning, but for the transformation that followed. Looking back now, I understand that one careless sentence at a crowded restaurant could have destroyed me completely. Instead, it forced two broken people to confront painful truths neither of us wanted to face. Min Jae learned that inherited hatred is never truth, only fear passed down through generations. I learned that forgiveness, given carefully and earned slowly, can create something stronger than the prejudice that almost kept us apart. Our story began with him rejecting me because of my race. It ended with him choosing me because of my character, proving that real love only begins after pride, prejudice, and fear are finally completely left behind.